All right. Hello and welcome to another episode of the Revenue Revolution podcast. And today we've got James Matthews. So very lucky to have you here, James, sorry. If you don't mind giving us a little bit of a brief about yourself, where you come from professionally, your background, what you're currently doing at Connected, a little bit about the company as well, and then
No-
we
no-
can.
Yeah, of course, and no worries for the Matt thing. I think I've got people that think my name is Matthew James, and I've known for 20 years. It's a problem with two first names for a name. So yeah, James Matthews. I currently am the Chief Commercial Officer at Connected. I've been doing sales for nigh on 20 years. Started out doing currency broking and went into data information sales for a company called Informa. Moved to New York, set up a sales team for them there. Did the same in Sao Paulo for that business. Then joined Startup Land for a company called Agflow, based out of Geneva in Switzerland. Was there for a few years trying to grow that business, which ultimately didn't work out, but learned a lot from it. Joined Connected back here in the UK and in London, which is where I'm from. I've been working there for the last 5 years. Was sort of the seventh person at that company, and now is 130 people or so. I'm an exec director, do board advisory, non-exec and fractional stuff too.
So tell us a little bit more about Connected so that we can position the context. So the
Yeah.
business model, the type of sales cycles, the
Yep.
where the sales cycles usually come from.
Yeah, so Connected is a marketplace. So we work with startups and scale ups on one side and fractionals on the other. To us, fractionals mean board advisory, non-exec, or fractional leadership roles, and we help to bring those two together. So the mission statement is that we help businesses and individuals transition into and succeed in the future of fractional work. For us now on the startups and scale up side, we've got kind of like a reverse recruitment model, if you like. And so actually our kind of monetization comes from the candidate side. So we offer training courses, mentorship, and guaranteed first roles for people that are looking to get into fractional work. And that's where we monetize. And so you're talking relatively short sales cycles, an average order value of around £2,500 or something like that. On the startup side, we do acquisition, but that's on a free basis. We have sold that product in different iterations of the journey previously, but now, in order to get better quality businesses and more interesting positions, it's free on that side of the marketplace.
Well, you must be doing something well because I see you absolutely everywhere. Everybody speaks about Connected, and this is great, right? Because I think the future of work is very much going into fractional roles, especially with AI getting more and more space into the classic workflows. What's your take on that? Because obviously there's been an evolution of the fractional roles over the last, I would say, maybe 5 years, maybe since COVID even. Like, where is the market going? How do you manage that transition?
Mm, well, like I think when I started Connected 5 years ago, one of the things that held fractional work back was there was this stigma towards it that it's all about the hours that you put in rather than the knowledge you have or the skill sets that individual have. And I think in a post-COVID and with it increasing dominance of AI, that stigma has eroded. And I think now generally the attitude of startups, scale ups, and businesses are um, that they need access to the best talent that's able to drive an organization further. And I think a lot of that is fueled from AI, and it's removed this idea of it's about perspiration rather than execution. And so I think that's evolved, and now businesses are a lot more, I guess not just open to fractional work, but seeking out unique talent in the marketplace, and this is where like fractional can really come in and come into play. And I think the market will continue to push that way as it helps senior leaders to be much more effective.
Yeah. And I guess there's a shift as well in positioning from the candidate side. Um, Obviously the modern, no, sorry, the standards kind of almost antiquated now layout is I've been in a company for multiple years, I've made my way up, and I need a long-term contract in that new company with equity vesting and all of that, especially in SaaS. How does that translate in a fractional environment?
Yeah, well, I get this question a lot, particularly from people with this kind of a sales or commercial background. To me, you still need commissionable elements in sales leadership, in fractional roles. You shouldn't be doing it and not having skin in the game, and that's the same whether that's commission or equity. And maybe those things look different to a fractional leader. In a way to a full-time employee, but it's really important that they're still there. Um, I think when you look at tenure of contracts, it's different. I mean, the working world now, I swear, if you're at a business for longer than 2 years, that's a long-term contract these days, which is kind of crazy. Um, but look, again, dependent upon the type of businesses, lots of really early stage startups and scale ups like fractional sales and marketing commercial leaders is one of the roles that are most popular on Connected because it used to be you would get 3 or 4 graduates in to a sales role to start a business and pray one of them is good and you don't have processes, you don't have a CRM, you don't know what your ICP is. And I think that's really difficult. And so, uh, you know, actually getting access to established sales leader that can figure out what your sales process should be and work backwards from your ICP and what problems you're going to be solving and build things around that makes you much more effective. And it's really common in those roles that actually that's more days per week as the business grows and can eventually evolve into a really long-term contract. But
Yeah.
in those positions, I think equity is still really interesting, and that's me taking that role. I still want, yeah, okay, it'll be a cliff on equity, but I want it if I do a good job over the first 6 months or a year that I can get some
Yeah.
early stage skin in the game because that's why you take that risk for working with an early stage startup, right? Even as a fractional.
Yeah. And from a trend point of view, what do what do startups look for in terms of fractional people at the moment?
I think the biggest thing, people that have done it before, it's there is, let's take the person that you sort of mentioned there, has worked at a corporate organization, has been there for 20 years, and they started as a BDM and then now a VP of sales at I don't know, a Salesforce or whoever, like, just a larger corporation. Well, um, even Salesforce, I guess, very startup here. Salesforce even been going 20 years, probably just. But yeah, I think if people haven't done it in that fractional capacity before, it's a worry and a concern to startups. And so, although you might have that expertise, are you able to manage that doing it a day per week? Like, what does that mean for you if it's a fractional leadership role? If you're
Yeah.
working on a board advisory or a non-exec basis, a non-exec is a really good example of, well, actually, do you understand governance and how to run a board and how to keep a company safe? And if you haven't done that before, it's difficult to sort of trust that. And so I think, you know, there's 2 types of experience. One is, yeah, okay, can this person do that role? Do they have the sales commercial nous to solve my go-to-market problems that, I might be facing in my business to launch my new product to do whatever it may be. But secondarily, are they experienced in work in a fractional capacity, and like that could and should be managing teams still. And it's difficult to manage teams
Mm,
if you haven't done it before when you're not doing it 5 days a week, because how do you influence those sales reps that are on your team? And if you're only there for a day and a half, you can't give them the same level of TLC that you would in a typical,
yeah.
sales management capacity if you're doing it full time.
Which department, which function is the hottest? I don't know from a which
Which function
department?
is the
Yeah,
hottest?
which from a fractional point of view.
This is a really interesting question. So when we started 5 years ago, it was all about product tech, building the thing, whatever the thing was, and how do we make the thing better, what features that we need. And I remember 4 or 5 years ago, if I was coming on a podcast like this, my message was always, it's great to build the best thing, but ship it and learn and get it in your hands of your customers and see what works and what doesn't, and iterate and evolve, and it will get better much quickly. And actually pay as much attention to the commercial side and getting in your hands of your customers, because that should be balanced, right? One feeds the other. If the more you learn about the product from your customers, the better the
Mm.
product gets. And so it's a bit like a seesaw on that side. And now I'd say it's a little bit the other way around. If everyone has gone the other way and are less concerned about building the thing, and it's all about commercializing it. And so, now we see, I think, like, go-to-market advisory boards are the number one advisory board currently that we see on Connected. Product and tech is also still popular. Scaling businesses, that means lots of different things. Operational advisory
Yeah.
boards as well. And so, they're just some of them. Financial advisors and fractional roles is probably where it all began. Fractional CFOs was the number one. It's still really large part of the market as well.
We see, I mean, from our angle, we're speaking to GTM kind of revenue teams, and we see more and more fractional RevOps getting in place. Because as you said, that I think the product side of it is much more accessible for AI. So you don't need as many engineers, you don't need as many product people. But if that means you can ship faster, it means that you probably have a bottleneck on the commercialization side and the automation and all of that.
Yeah.
Do you see RevOps as the next big thing?
Yeah, I mean, I think RevOps is also. I mean, when you talk at RevOps as well, I think there's so many different specialisms that are in there. So, like, shorter term fractional roles of like almost project based stuff becomes so important too,
Yeah,
because actually, if I want to achieve A, B, and C, and you've got um not dormant, but a traditional RevOps team, I think maybe it lacks some flexibility with than doing it a little bit differently at times. And so, yeah, it can enable you to shoot faster if it's done well, for sure.
yeah. Any new job titles that you've noticed about a mate who's got a job and is AI something something, and then enablement through AI something something.
Yeah, well, I think you put AI on anything. AI is going to be the new. Do you remember 5 years ago? It's all businesses became, instead of healthcare, health tech, and education businesses, ed tech, and AI. I think will be the new thing. I guess that's been the case for a couple of years, right? You put AI on the front or the back end of pretty much anything. So yeah, I mean, anything to do with AI enablement, yeah, for sure. Um, I don't know any new job titles. I'm trying to think because I always take the mickey out of them at first, and then they become commonplace overnight. And I'm generally out of touch as a person. I remember making fun out of customer success when customer success came in, and go to market too, and so I'm showing my age a little bit there, but I can't think of anything very recently. Something comes to mind, I'll shoot you a message after.
Yeah, that's not. James, question around the like, what a good fractional profile look like, what's good look like, and then what doesn't good too good on the fractional side. Like when do you look at a profile and start cringing a
Yeah,
little bit to say, oh, this one's gonna be hard to position?
yeah, yes. Well, I guess this is a really good question. I guess first we can talk a little bit about CVs and bios. So part of the stuff that Connected does is, education courses around personal branding and repositioning. I would say from a fractional perspective, it's a slightly different CV typically. If you look at someone's CV from a sales perspective, it might be to do with sales methodologies that you've put in place or targets that you've hit at different businesses and size of teams that you've managed. Developers, it might be languages that you can code in, or if you're accountants, what accountancy qualifications that you have, and all of these sorts of things. Obviously, they're important sometimes if you're implying for a fractional CFO role, you might want to list your qualifications. But if you're moving into board advisory or non-exec stuff in particularly rather than fractional. It should always be about forward-looking things that you can do. So rather than the stuff that you've done in the past, if I dropped you, Mick, into a business right now, what are the type of things that you would help with? So I can successfully launch products into XYZ market. Instead of looking back at like historical things that you've done, now I'm a owner of an ed tech business and I look at your profile, I can say, oh, okay, Mick launches products into the ed tech sector and has worked with, the major organizations and buyers within that market. That just within reading that line,
Mm.
okay, great. I'm interested in Mick. And so, it's those forward looking things in terms of what value you can bring to an organization, rather than things that you've done in the past and try to be positioning that holistically to the business. What are the things that are going to be difficult? I guess it depends on the stage of businesses. But it's positioning, I think that's the most important, and so make sure that you're visible, and if it's obvious about how you bring value to a business, that's the most important thing. So for us, when we're working with people and we find it um difficult to work with them is when that's not obvious, and that's usually a positioning thing rather than a skill set piece.
What are the red flags on the other side? So obviously there are people who are trying to find fractional positions, and then there are companies hiring for those positions. And I mean, as an employee, like more now I'm a founder, so it's a little bit different. But when I was a more standard employee, there were definite red flags on the startup side, specifically to the founder. So when you speak to a founder and he's saying XYZ, you're like, this is complete BS. I need to stay away from it.
Yeah.
And I guess you're looking at it from a massive scale, like on
Mm.
either side. What are the typical red flags on the higher
Yeah.
higher
Well,
end?
I'll say maybe some slightly controversial things here, but in my experience, all founders are crazy, right? And they have to be crazy because it's fucking hard to build businesses, and so that makes it more difficult when you're a fractional looking to work with founders, because I think it is being crazy is a prerequisite of being a founder, because it's you wouldn't do it otherwise, right? And so that's a challenge. I think dig really deeply into like what they're trying to do, and like it becomes very clear. Make sure that you spend some time with that founder. I mean, it should be obvious anyway, unless you're speaking to a really early stage business, that's literally a pre-seed business which isn't funded, that is trying to get off the ground. Now, some of these businesses will be the most interesting ones, but spend a bit of time, dig deeply into what they're trying to do and how they're going about it. Some red flags, particularly for fractionals, if people are trying to bring you on board and pay you for half a days per week, and are asking way too much of you and reason then are not up for a reasonable conversation about a potential adjustment is a huge red flag. You should see it in relationships that they have with other people, other team members, is trust and respect there across the team. And like you'll find even in really early stage businesses where there's only three, four, five, six people, um, if you've got a difficult founder, it can become toxic quite quickly.
Mm.
And so I think try and speak to as many people that are working in or with the business as well, because yeah, that can give you some red flags. But it is difficult, and I think that's part of working with an early stage business and coming back to all founders are crazy. It's also a really lonely place, and it's really hard to build a business. And so, I think there's got to be an element of expectations have to be right for fractionals that are working with early stage startups too, because they don't have the processes in place that you would have seen at other organizations. From a go-to-market perspective, they can be wildly naive or unprepared. Um, and it can leave some people aghast, I think. And so you have to be willing to work with really some quite raw stuff.
Yeah.
So when I started Connected, we were using Airtable as our CRM, which isn't a CRM, and you kind of have to adapt to that sorts of stuff. I think too.
Yeah. And also, I mean, as a founder, you think your baby is pretty, right? It's like, I've made it. It's the most beautiful baby in the world. And then there's a very funny meme on the internet, and then there's older people looking at the baby, and the baby's so ugly. And you and
Yeah,
you're like, you have to say, yes, it's beautiful. But
yeah.
it can make the conversation quite hard because you don't have, it's hard to step back a little bit and look at it without any subjectivity. So how do you manage founder's ego when they are coming to you to say, "Hey, I need to find a RevOps leader, I need to find a fractional a VP of sales," like, and for a fact that the business doesn't is not gonna go anywhere. It's some
Mm.
bad value prop. How do you manage
Yeah.
that?
Well, I mean, look, I guess that's as connected. It's not our place to judge businesses that are going to go massive or not, and so we are unbiased there. If they're in market, then that's what we judge them off, right? And so we try and take unbiased perspective. I mean, I think in Connected, what I can say of working with ego, I think the single most destructive thing in building a startup or scale up is ego. And when I say ego, it's not just founders' ego. I think people that are defensive in general.
Mm,
There's so much shit that goes wrong, excuse my language. I think in startups and scale ups across a big business organization, and like you have to pick up on it so fast because there's fires left, right, and center in lots of different ways. And if you are not all over trying to react as quickly as you can and to build structures that prevent them and will allow you to get ahead of them, I think it overcomes them. And so ego stops that from happening in my experience, that people try and cover up their own mistakes because they're embarrassed or ashamed, and everyone makes mistakes. And so that includes the founder is the most important person there, and I think for any founder, I would give a shout out to Roy, who's the founder of Connected, is that listening is the most important piece, and if the founder can't listen, can't hear, like you need to be calling that baby ugly like once a week, probably, right, in different ways because it is, and it's like you don't that perfect thing. Yeah, I always like talk about, that there's bugs on Amazon, right? It's like a business couldn't be any bigger if it tried, and there's still problems with, Amazon as an e-commerce service, right? And so
yeah.
for businesses that are a lot less established, there's a lot more challenges. So yeah, I think ego is the biggest killer in sort of startup world.
I agree. And anywhere, the same is true. Sports is the same. Education is the same. You need to be able to, as people call that coachability. I struggle with the word coachability. I think if you're a good coach and you're providing value in your coaching, people take it on. And usually it's a more reflective of the problem of the person giving the coaching than the person receiving it. But the defensibility and the defensiveness, I think, is a very good one because if by nature you're going to push back, then there's another element, there's another barrier for you to progress on that self-work that can address that. James, I've got a question because you've got a B2B background, and obviously Connected is has a hybrid business model to some extent where it's B2C to fractionals, but there's an element of B2B relationship with startups.
Yeah.
How did you manage that transition?
Yeah. I think it rarely happens now, right? One of the I was listening to the last podcast of yours this morning, Chris. I think actually it was Hitesh maybe that did it, and Chris was saying, well, like sales is sales, and when he was trying to go into SaaS 10 years ago, people were saying you can't get into SaaS. This software is sort of this deep dark secret. Um, I think B2C and B2B typically feel like they're so different, but there is an element of sales is sales. I think it's probably harder to transition from B2C into B2B because going from there, um, one or two people involved in a buying decision to five, six, seven, eight, nine, 10, 11, 12, whatever that number seems to be getting bigger and bigger today in the B2B world is a bigger transition. I think. And so I guess I'm thankful that I did it this way round as opposed to
Yeah,
the other way round. But like, I also think I came into Connected at a super early stage. And actually, probably if Roy was more experienced and Roy was an exited founder still, he would have hired a person with a B2C background, right? Rather than the me probably within that role. So favorable on a couple of counts, maybe naivety of the founder for not looking someone directly with that background, which I would absolutely have advised Roy at the time. Um,
yeah,
but yeah, I think all of the lots of the same stuff still applies. So how do you build the sales process? Like who is the ICP? Um, okay, we don't use Medic or MedPick, but we look at building our own methodologies into each individual sale that just apply more directly. So I think you're using a lot of the same frameworks. It's still trying to close as you go in a deal, and actually if it's not there, working back within that deal to
yeah.
uncover pain points and challenges that you've missed that will allow the deal to progress. So I think fundamentals are inherently the same, just applied in a different way.
And how do you, at the moment, manage to keep everyone aligned on, I guess, timelines? But I mean, specifically for you, there's competition on either side, right? So in B2B, it's a little bit less awkward in that sense because there's only competition on one side, which is the vendor side. And the
Yeah.
vendor is not trying to compete typically, like they're gonna take any opportunity, right? Whereas on the fractional side is they're looking at options in terms of startup, and then startups are looking in terms of fractional
Yeah.
people.
So this is really complicated, actually. I mean, and I hadn't worked in a marketplace before, but if you're a marketplace has to be balanced, right? And if the marketplace isn't balanced, it doesn't work. Too many startups, not enough fractional, doesn't work. It's dead.
Yeah,
Not enough startups, too many fractionals, doesn't work. It's dead. And for us, it's not just okay. So you've got the marketplace, you've got startups, and you've got fractionals. You've also got we're active in the UK and the US, right? So you've got to balance both of those things in both of those geographies. Um, Transition to portfolio, our product guarantees a pro bono role on the fractional side to get your first sort of fractional role. and obviously then people are also looking for paid work. So you've got to balance startups, fractionals in the UK, in the US, with enough pro bono opportunities and paid work for both sides, right? So there's a lot going on within that, and so this
Yeah.
is something that we speak about every single week at Connected, and we're always trying to do a better job. Thankfully, we have always had great distribution into kind of startups and scale ups. And so that's, I would say the reason really that Connected is where it is now. And is a huge part of this business. But because it's B2C and that, you're able to forecast quite reliably across both sides of the marketplace.
Mm.
So I could probably tell you within February or March, we have really precise numbers of how many fractionals are going to be coming into the business, how many startups, what do we need to do on the UK and US. And we treat those numbers from an equilibrium perspective. They're as important as sales numbers, right? And so
Yeah.
actually again, so long as we're hitting, exceeding all of those equilibrium numbers in roughly the right proportions, we're in a good state. But if there's a drop off somewhere, whether it's UK, US, startups, fractionals, whatever it is, it's a big problem quite quickly. So yeah, it always has to be front of mind, basically.
Well, I can see why you're a legend, James. Sounds very complicated.
I thought it's just that's why I've lost all my hair, Mick. I don't know about anything else.
We're almost at time, James. So we've got a bit of a tradition. If you listen to the podcast regularly, Chris has left a question for you. So I'm going to ask you the question, and then it's your turn to ask a question to the next guest. But I mean, your space is fascinating. I think it's totally where the market is going. My point of view is that I think eventually there's going to be a lot of AI and a lot of fractional roles everywhere, and maybe a handful of like how do you call it, like contracted full-time employees. But yeah, you guys are doing an amazing work. I see you everywhere, so it's obviously a very good sign.
Thanks.
So the question is, how do you manage the complexity of sales cycles and internal forecasting when work predominantly in a remote environment, both internally and externally?
Mm. Lots going on. Would you read that one more time, just so
Uh,
we can piece it all together?
how do you manage the complexity of sales cycles and internal forecasting when we work predominantly in a remote environment, both internally and externally?
Yeah. I was speaking on about forecasting the other day, and to me, the key when you're looking at forecasting is not to get too committed to one single way of forecasting, and that then gives you an ability to triangulate a forecast, and if you can look at a few different things to work out roughly where you're going to be, it's less likely you're going to be off. And so, if you look at it's not just the old school speaking, getting commits to reps or getting commits that generate from a CRM. Don't trust them too much because they can be wrong, and
Yeah,
actually, um, it's important that you interrogate your own pipeline data so you can understand when that thing does go off, because normally it goes off kilter all at once because multiple people start doing different things that impact a forecast. Um, Look at macro elements as well, simple complications of calculations of how many salespeople you have, historical revenue performances in different months. They are primitive, but they will give you a reference point.
yeah,
Look at external factors in terms of how performance has been trending against size of pipeline, and so if you look at it in a few different ways, then I think you'll be able to get to a forecast that you can somewhat trust. But the other part of forecasting is you're always going to be wrong, right? And to me, forecasting is most useful as education tool anyway, right? And so you do it so you can get it wrong and you can understand where you get it wrong. It's the best coaching tool for individual reps. If you're
Yeah.
forecasting 100 grand to me and you do 50 grand, well, where has that gone? Why has it gone? Has that deal slipped? What's happened to it? What's going on within those deals? It's the same for sales managers and sales leaders. Your commit was 10 million and actually it's 11 million. You've over exceeded. How has that happened? Why has that happened? What's caused that overperformance? And I think that can help you to get better. Long-winded waffle.
Very good.
Sorry, Mick, I talk too much.
No, it's good. And I like that you took an overachieving example because people usually are fine with having delivered more than they're forecasted, but I think it's just as bad. It
It's
shows you're not really in control.
Yeah, well, you don't know, right? And so it's like it's the miss. It's the miss, whether it's under or over, the miss is the learning. And it's actually if you just do a forecast for the sake of forecasts, obviously they have its purpose to go, okay, where am I going to finish in Feb or where am I going to finish in Q1? But the miss is the important bit, and that's where you'll find out about yourself, about your business, and what you can do better.
Awesome. And James, what's the question for the next guest?
Yeah. Question: what is the biggest mistake that you've made in your sales career?
Nice.
Just let's make it a bit personal and it's a bit
Yeah,
spicy.
yeah, let's do it. All right. Thank you, James. It was a pleasure. Guys, this was the Revenue Revolution podcast. Until next time. Bye bye.
Cheers.